hyper-specialization, which started in the Industrial Revolution, and the buildup of the big conglomerates of the 20th century is about to come to an end.
One of my dream scenarios is just have my AI agent in my ears and just talk about my thoughts and have a sparrings partner.
AI could enable the Greek antique dream of doing some hard physical labor, doing some farm work, actually building stuff, and then spending the rest of the time of the day philosophizing. I think there's a very deep desire in our species to preserve the idea of a human thought.
I would stand by the thesis that the production costs of almost everything will go near zero. The barriers of entry will be lowered significantly. That's one of the biggest opportunities.
We try to overcome the constraints of our physical bodies and take humans out of everything. What is left to admire? We are back on the Odyssey journey. Welcome to the third episode in our intro trilogy. This time, having covered macro and crypto in the past two, we will focus on AI. Happy to have you here, Owner. Between us two, you're definitely the AI expert compared to me. So what's the meta implication of AI? Has it suddenly killed the linear progress of mankind and we are now in the age of exponentiality? Where are we at?
I'm definitely not an expert in AI. I am a savvy user of AI. And I've been a savvy user of AI pre-ChatGPT in my role as a data scientist, building prediction models, using statistics, using inference. There was a big machine learning hype a couple years ago before LLMs got popular. And even for me as a savvy user, ChatGPT and afterwards the deeper integrations, different models, whether it's anthropic models or it's DeepSeek or Gemini, and their integration into tools like Cursor or Windsurf or Replit has been a massive game changer to my workflow and my productivity. Just to name a few examples, for large text-based documents that you need to review where third parties were involved previously, I can do a sanity check myself using LLMs. For prototyping products for which I used to follow a design process, maybe design something in Figma or put together a spreadsheet, I can now invest the same time and have a working prototype, a clickable working prototype, which is a web app or a mobile app. And the same on the back end. If I have an idea for a technical product that has database and an API, prototyping has become so easy. To give you an idea, in a day or two, you can build the prototype for probably every app out there, and it will only get better from here. I'm not talking about production-ready apps. People say, yeah, but it introduces bugs, but it's not secure and all these things. I think you can build secure apps by having a good workflow. However, if you want production readiness, you can have an expert engineering team look over these things. But long story short, even I was overwhelmed by the productivity boost and the progress. And I can only assume from here, the costs of production of everything will go near zero.
That for sure sounds like an age of exponentiality. Do you think that these impacts on workflows and the workspace in general, is that something that only you and super tech-savvy people experience, or how do you think it will unfold in the broader?
It will trickle down everywhere. And I think there lies a huge opportunity in making these tools accessible to different peer groups. For example, in engineering, obviously it's the first peer group because it's very native to engineering, but also whether it's financial applications or whether it's real production facilities, which is a whole different game, by the way, where I know nothing about. I think it will trickle down to all industries and different peer groups. And I think these tools will get more and more convenient and they will integrate into everything that we use, essentially, right? So you will not feel that you interact with an AI. The most absurd example is obviously a humanoid, Tesla's robot or whatnot. But you can think much simpler. It can be in your appliances. It can be in an app on your mobile phone. It can be on your smartwatch. It can be in any device that you use, all the way to production facility industrial devices that are enabled by AI behind the scenes. So yes, I do think it will trickle down to every part of our life.
What are the workflows or job groups that will be abstracted away the first? Everything at administration. We briefly touched on that field in our macro podcast. Who do you think will be affected by this first? In what way? And what are we going to do with these people?
Regardless of AI, I would say that jobs that are subject to automation replacing them, that's already been happening regardless of the nascent AI advancements, right? So, in my opinion, that will only continue. Every job that is somewhat repetitive, every job that you would belittle as monkey work or repetitive like manual work, every job that does not require original thinking, I think, is more at risk. However, even for jobs that require creativity and thinking, instead of having a 10-person team, you can now do the same with a 3-person team by utilizing AI to enhance your thinking process and stuff like that. It's not the same, obviously, and there are fields that where it will take probably another 20 years. So I'm not at all painting a doom scenario here. To me, it's more an opportunity for everyone to reconsider what they have been doing and whether it will be relevant or not. I mean, ironically, I think software engineers may be one of the first groups actually that will be replaced.
Mm. I agree that it's an opportunity more than it is a threat because, again, touching on our first episode, we concluded that the majority of jobs is more adult daycare than something genuinely useful. So that's on the job side. Looking at the world and society in general, what other fields of volatility or impact will AI introduce? When I talk to people who are pretty avid users of AI and have technical backgrounds and they understand the broad implications, how it works, how it gets developed, what's the rate of progress there, they have all become super uncertain about what the world will look like even 12 months from now.
It's impossible to answer that question for me. I wouldn't make any prediction there, but I do agree that it's very difficult to make predictions. I would stand by the thesis that the production costs of almost everything will go near zero. It will never go to zero, but it will go near zero. It will approach zero. And what that means is that the barriers of entry will be lowered significantly. That's one of the biggest opportunities. And at the same time, ironically, it's the biggest risk because what is even defensibility in the era where production costs are near zero? Yes, you may be able to penetrate a new market fairly quickly and get some market share, but you have to assume that with the progression of AI, it will only become easier and easier for new market entrants to do the exact same thing. So I think that will change a lot of things. Personally, one of the things that I haven't seen being discussed as often in the context of AI is the role of a firm or a company. If you think about the theory of a firm, why it exists, it stems from an era of industrialization where the main goal was to make everything as efficient as possible and have a streamlined process. That assumes human labor, and that assumes a competitive advantage with regards to extracting value through some business process. I think AI, again, changes that game a little bit because now anyone has access to this information and anyone can prototype something. At least if you think about a digital process, a digital value chain, anyone will be able to build these things. And when I say anyone, obviously there's a peer group, 60 plus or whatever, who may not be capable because they grew up in a different generation. That's not what I mean. I think in general, Gen Z plus, everyone who can use a computer and the internet will be able to do that if they want to. So I wonder personally what that means for the future of organizations. How important is employer branding or the concept of company culture in that context? If I don't have to have a company to build what I built, and maybe I have a set of loose contributors, which may or may not be agents. I mean, it can even be a mix of human contributors and agent contributors for the goal that I'm trying to achieve. That is super interesting to me. And I wonder how that will change the dynamics of being a founder, building companies, building products, and stuff like that.
No, I fully agree. the age of like hyper specialization, which started in the Industrial Revolution and the buildup of the big conglomerates of the 20th century, that has peaked for sure and is about to come to an end, because under the assumption that AI enables generalists to have an edge, not because they are better at these super niche products and specialized products, but if it's just about, can I, as a person with good generalist knowledge, high raw IQ, little bit of EQ whatsoever, and the knowledge of like utilizing these tools, you can probably maximize your ROI by being like a small up, maybe even a solopreneur. There's been that thesis around that we'll see the first one person, 1 billion company within the next years enabled by AI. I'm not sure whether it's going to like take that extreme form, but like the trend of sizing down companies, especially reducing all the administrative burden, it's a healthy trend because it is useless jobs and you could use that human labor for other occupations where the human part is much more important. Think about service jobs, especially in higher class categories like hospitality, think hairdressers, think tailoring. That is something where you generally want the human component. There it is a value add. Whereas in all of these administrative functions, it's adult daycare and it is not creating anything new. It is hardly creating a net benefit to society as a whole because it doesn't produce anything.
I have a question for you, since you gave that example. What do you think about self-driving cars?
Probably inevitable. We will either, for just the purpose of commuting, use these self-driving cars down in a couple of years. And to drive ourselves, it would be just purely a leisure activity we do for fun.
So if you take a ride with a self-driving car, do you care about seeing someone on the steering wheel or not?
Once the self-driving cars have like some sufficient amount of data points where you can say, these are at least as safe, if not safer, than like human drivers. And like the most important aspect is not, okay, like what are the odds of like getting into some like accident with a scratch, but like the odds that are relevant, like how many fatal accidents are there? Like if there's like some pedestrian
I got
jumping in front of a car, like is it going to swerve and like ride off the bridge and I
Stay
die?
with me.
Yeah.
I got the point. Stay with me. If today you order an Uber and there would be a black window and you don't see the driver, and yes, they do ask you for the code, but assume it all happens in the app. You jump into the car, it drives you from A to B, and you arrive at your destination. It's the exact same experience as being in a self-driving car. I think that is something where people exaggerate that this is going to be so crazy if we get there. The experience, we're already there. You tap a button, you describe your intent, a car shows up, you enter and you exit. And if you would have a black window, the experience would be exactly the same.
Yeah.
The only difference is right now you see a driver. To your point with service workers, assuming AI is going to get better, humanoids are going to get better, you will not be able to distinguish at some point. I'm not meaning to say, I do agree with your point. In the era where the costs of everything near zero, I think human labor will be much more valuable. It's like 99% is AI generated, but this thing is so exclusive. An actual human, whatever, did this song, cooked this dish, built this tower, you know? So I think it will be the handmade human labor label will gain value, but it will still be very, very exclusive.
And I don't think that exclusivity will die down because at the end of the day, if we try to overcome like the constraints of our physical bodies and like take humans out of everything, what is left to admire? What is left to be proud of for us as a species? It would undermine the very fabric of society. So I don't think that there will ever be an equilibrium where we all strive towards getting rid of humans and everything. In the very opposite, we will pride ourselves in a couple of decades if we are able to afford going to restaurants which are not served by robots that prepare and deliver the food. Pride ourselves of going to restaurants where there are still some human waiters and waitresses left.
As a leisure activity, yes. As I think everything with regards to feeding mankind as a base need, probably no, right? That is probably something that will more and more be automated. And again, not judging. To some extent, I don't even appreciate the trend of everything being hyper accessible. And I do enjoy the process of preparing food myself a lot. But on average, things will get more and more processed. Things will get more and more convenient. Things will get more and more automated. And the last step, there will be a humanoid in your kitchen someday that does something. Similar to how we have tools today in the kitchen that help us process our food, whether it's an oven or it's a mixer or it's a cooking computer. There's more sophisticated things there. That trend will continue. And I feel like AI will accelerate that a lot. A stupid example, but think of all these recipe pages. Since ChatGPT, I didn't use a single recipe page. I was just, hey, like, can you give me a recipe for this? Like, I have kids. Can you give me a recipe for pancakes? And then I look at it and it gives me like a random US recipe. And I'm like, I don't have all this bullshit. Can you please adjust it to a European recipe? And then it gives me the European recipe. And I'm like, okay, can you reduce the sugar but still make sure it's blah, blah, blah? I'm interested in cooking, but I didn't learn it the proper way. I didn't educate myself enough on the science of what makes the dough soft versus tough versus what ingredients lead to what. AI enables me to describe my intent and gives me what I want without me having to have this prior experience. And that is just in a nutshell the magical experience.
I mean, we'll get to a stage where we, on the one hand, become super fascinated with what we can do with AI now. But on the other hand, it will also scare us in some sense, because there is a reason why you have to train hundreds, if not thousands of hours in the entire history of mankind to acquire these skills. Now, if it's all at our fingertips, what will that do to the human psyche? And I think we already have a recurring theme in all three of these intro trilogy podcasts, where in the macro one, we talked about how many of these jobs are sort of just, therefore the perceived stability of society. Then when we talked about crypto, we talked about how do open markets enabled by crypto expose all of these fragilities, interdependencies, and these social constructs that have artificially stabilized society. And AI is doing that not on the mechanism layer, but on the execution layer, because now these administrative jobs, they can be abstracted away. Uber drivers will be replaced by self-driving cars. And it's not only unemployment, yada, yada. That's one thing. But the other thing is, now we are suddenly confronted with the fact that in the past, we've had all of these jobs, all of these functions, all of these skills, pretending to be meaningful. But what you already said a couple of minutes ago, the actual interaction we have right now with an Uber driver is almost alike as it was a self-driving car.
Yes.
Now you take the human out of the equation. We previously pretended that the human played a significant role in that equation, even though it was meaningless. And now we are really blank to blank confronted with that reality. Just as when people worry about a macro crisis eradicating jobs, the monetary layer is one thing, but all of these unemployed people now having to ask themselves, okay, what do we do? Are these jobs going to come back? All of the companies having to ask themselves, well, were these functions really needed and useful in the first place? That's another implicit layer that nobody ever talks about, but which I think constitutes the other side of a coin there.
Going back to philosophy and lifting heavy.
AI could enable the Greek antique dream of doing some hard physical labor, doing some farm work, playing around with your kids, building stuff, actually building stuff, chopping wood, and then spending the rest of the time of the day philosophizing about things. I think there's a very deep desire in our species to preserve the idea of a human thought. I mean, of course, like you can say, yeah, there's no original thought. Everything you've ever thought of, somebody else has thought of before. And that's obviously true, but we have the innate desire to experience that thing called life on our own. There is never going to be a state where we just get all the information fed into us. Yeah, you can read all of these books about all of these learnings, about all of these mistakes that all of these great people have done in the past. But it's still not going to prevent you from experiencing them yourself.
That's the exact reason why I stopped reading at some point. I still consume content and I do read if I want to read a specific section, but I read those interesting concepts And then I realized it doesn't anchor in the brain the same way when you actually experience something yourself, even though you've read it before. Experiencing something yourself really anchors in the brain. And funny excurse to how like neural networks learn, or how AI learns usually. But basically, it's trial and error. It's not by education. You don't tell the system, hey, do this that way. It's more like you give it the parameters, you give it the rules, you give it the laws, and it operates within the system, and then see what works and what doesn't work. Having kids, it's so fascinating. When they start playing with bricks and they start building towers, it's the same thing. I wouldn't be able to tell my toddler, hey, put this brick that way on top of the other brick, and now turn the other brick around. Do it in a straight line so it's stable. That doesn't work. What does work is the toddler trying to build the tower 50 times and then realizing, oh, if I do it this way, it doesn't fall, right? And then it starts to learn that way. So I think that's fascinating, the way these systems are learning. But yeah, the next years, I think, will be significant because AI was accessible to a group of experts or within certain industries. I think we're more and more entering a phase where it's accessible to more and more people. And it's not just accessible, it's also more convenient. And I'll give you my dream scenario of the Greek antique. One thing I love doing is just thinking, right? Like you said, I think it's one of the most underutilized activity that we do because we're caught up in meetings, which are 90% useless, and we constantly have to do all these things that we don't really want to do. If I walk for an hour outside, the amount of thinking and imagination and fantasy that's happening in my brain is unheard of. And one of my dream scenarios is just have my AI agent in my ears and just talk about my thoughts and have a sparrings partner that documents my thoughts, that maybe amends them and does some deep research, maybe add some online resources, and be able to develop thoughts, original thoughts to some extent, while doing moderate physical activity, while being outside, while enjoying nature, and then coming back and being hyper productive with what you've previously created while being outside. And it can even be much simpler than that. It doesn't have to be a crazy original thought. It can even be, think of all the chores you have to do that are answer emails, answer chat messages, read contracts, authorize certain transactions, sign certain transactions, all the admin stuff, or even something on an engineering side. Hey, review this piece of work, comment on that piece of work. Imagine having an interface, because with LLMs, the main thing they enable is human interaction. The description of an intent and the consumption of an intent and the translation of that intent into some action, right? It's not rocket science, but the convenience of something being able to read me a piece that I'm supposed to comment on, that I'm supposed to act on, me being able to describe my desired action, and it's being able to act on that action and implement it, that is crazy to me. The reason why I say the word intent so much is previously, if you had a problem, and it can be as simple as answer an email and as complex as build a mobile app. It's a problem, right? Previously, you had to develop a solution in your head, and then you had to use the tools to implement the solution that you developed in your head and materialize it through keystrokes or your mouse or whatever into a technical solution, whether you type a text to answer the email or you type code to build the app previously. Now that changes with AI. Instead of describing the solution in your head that you come up with from experience, now you just tell the AI, this is the outcome I want to achieve. Please implement the best solution for that. You describe your intent, and my intent is I want to answer the email, and my main message is, yes, I'm in agreement. No, I'm in disagreement with what you're saying. Previously, I had to think about, okay, which words do I use? How do I structure this? Who do I talk to? What do I address? And now it's no, my intent is this, please do it. In a mobile app, I had to think about the architecture, which model, which controllers, which view, which protocols do I use, which libraries. And now, no, I just want the app to be able to do this, to talk to that, and to present this to the user, and it does it. So I think the switch from humans having to solve the problems themselves to humans describing their intent and have the AI solve the problems is the biggest switch for me.
Do you think that is going to have any negative side effects on the younger generations, which natively grow up with these tools? If you think about the past, you've had the book press, then you had newspapers, then you had the TV, then you had the internet. These were always advancements in the availability of information, but it just made it more available. You didn't have to search for it so long, but you still had to learn the process of researching, structuring stuff, writing stuff, and comprehending it yourself. With AI, you can skip the process and you can just give it as an intent the outcome that I want. And AI reverse engineers how you get to that outcome. And a lot of the process thinking gets lost in there.
Will it impact younger generations? Yes. 100%. And I don't think avoiding it is an option. Regardless of if you think it's a good or a bad thing, I think avoiding is not an option because
Agreed.
it will impact everything. And we have to get very, very comfortable using these things and understanding how we can utilize and leverage these tools. I'm a delusional optimist. Our brains will change, thinking patterns will change, everything will change in the same way that I don't need to know anything about electronics or binary data processing or how the pixels are printed on my screen. Similarly, how previously if people wrote on a piece of paper, they don't need to understand how the ink comes out of the tool they're using. This is not really a great example, but my point is, with every advancement in technology, there's a lot of change. And I'm a delusional optimist in the sense that it will enable us to allocate brain capacity to other things that we aren't able to do today because we have to think about the mechanical implementation of the solution, for example. You can much faster experiment with prototypes or potential solutions. We will develop a complete new set of skills that we weren't able to develop previously because we were occupied with things that in 50 years from now will look like a waste of time.
It will be a very fine line to walk between maximally using AI as an enabler of our brain instead of a replacement of our brain. And I'm not that worried about like the AI doomerism, robots will take over the world, like the Skynet Terminator kind of scenarios. But what I am worried about is that just already you have that polarization between the very few heterodox thinking, agentically thinking people who are aware of their agency in their lives and use it, and 95 or even more or maybe a little less people just following the crowd and doing what is normal or what is average without making a conscious effort of questioning. And now with AI, you can abstract away and outsource even more of these thinking processes if you want to.
Yes.
And it is very easy to just fall into this hedonistic treadmill of, why would I even undertake the effort of questioning this or thinking about that or learning this? I can just outsource it to AI. And you don't need to have malicious intention as an AI company to force that upon people. It's just, as with unhealthy food or an unhealthy lifestyle, if people have the opportunity to do it without bearing the direct costs and the direct consequences of their actions, it's going to be very hard for the majority of the population to not fall into that hole.
Interesting. We're going to have a lot of real AI experts, not just us yapping on pretending to be experts. No, we're not. We said we're not experts, but we are savvy users of AI. And it's even part of the production suite of this podcast and this journey that we're doing. Maybe to close, as part of Odyssey, we don't just want to talk the talk. We also want to walk the walk, and we want to actually build products. And we're going to utilize AI heavily. Specifically, we're going to utilize tools like Cursor. We're going to utilize agents. We're going to utilize a lot of the models to help us build products and get to prototype in basically a few days and get to a production ready app in a couple weeks. So stay tuned for that. We're gonna release a bunch of interesting applications. Max, as always, it was a blast. Thanks a lot for your time.
Definitely. It was great to see your insights, and yeah, looking forward to the next one.
Speak soon.